Hello and welcome back to City Skylines. My voice should be all good again, or if you will, not as bad anymore. And today I should be able to take you through at least making this rail yard happen, and also a football stadium at some point in the video. And a bit more, maybe, probably, eventually. And what I should also note about this episode though is that it is quite short, and I did get some comments about the lengths of my recent videos not being as great as they could be. And what I should say about this video is that this video is long, as well as the video which I recorded before this, being episode 10, were just recorded in one session, and I didn't actually record any additional flying camera shots or any real-time footage, which is probably due to my laziness. I don't quite remember, but I don't really have much to show for this one. But in a way, the next episode should probably make up for that, hopefully. At least the next episode is going to be way longer than it was originally planned, and will at least have some real-time parts. But enough about that. This episode is about the rail yard and the stadium, and a couple of things that I should say about the rail yard is, first and foremost, I am by far not any type of train. I don't know what you would call it exactly, but I'm not a person who's quite knowledgeable about trains. So there are probably many mistakes that I make in the making of this rail yard. So if you do see some stuff that I do wrong and know why, don't hesitate to shoot me down, because I may definitely very well in the future return to this rail yard and change some things which aren't quite up to standards. What I should explain about my reasons as to why it's built in a certain way that it is. I basically wanted to have a rail yard over here, and I was thinking for a long time that I just wanted to make it a storage and also sorting rail yard, but really in the end decided to also make it a loading/unloading rail yard as well, on both sides of the yard actually over here, since City Skylines just does not really like it if you don't have a cargo train station, and it's really easy to get into these issues of not having enough goods available for commercial zones. But especially when it comes to industry or farming, getting the problem that there is a lack of raw resources. And that's really why I figured, just for game purposes, it would also be easy to get a cargo station. So this rail yard is quite small, but it is meant for storage and also sorting, and also a grand part of it is for loading and unloading things. And a lot actually of this rail yard is inspired by a rail yard which is pretty close to where I live. I think it's actually the only rail yard in the Netherlands, or at least the only real sizable one, near Rotterdam, which is quite a bit larger than this one. But it's something which I actually cycle over every day as I go to school and come back, or at least try to make my bus and come back hopefully. And that is something which is always cool to look at, and really wanted to have a similar type of rail yard in here. And what I also sort of, you could probably say, stole from that is the idea of having a small industrial section, that small strip of industry next to the rail yard, just to make sure that it's not just the bare rail tracks, but there's actually a bit of industry next to it as well, which is something to keep in mind. This one is quite a bit more fancy than you would usually see rail yards in real life be, and that is primarily due to the fact that I added industry along the sides of it as well, but also probably filled it with way more props than I should have done in hindsight. Also, something I should say about this is that at the moment it's filled with gravel and doesn't have too many tracks, especially given how the yard itself at the moment actually has only 6 tracks, which is ridiculously low for a rail yard. You'll quickly see those things go into 20, 30 tracks. I think the one next to where I live actually has 40 tracks something, which is quite large, but I will still make this one quite a bit larger, or at least a little bit larger, as this episode goes on, because one big mistake that I think I made initially was to add the gravel in between the train tracks, and that is something which I'll actually change at the end of this episode sometime, since I really wanted to add this gravel looking at a lot of UK and US rail yards, but eventually decided that it wouldn't be too great of a choice, since looking at the rail yard close to where I live actually has just grass between the train tracks, and not having to put the gravel in between them would allow me to actually place the train tracks closer to each other, and allowing me to place more tracks within this small space. Because even though this is a very small rail yard, I did want to not keep it to too few tracks, to be quite honest. Also, something that I should say about this is that it is as small as it is, since I really confine myself to a very small space over here, which has to do with the fact that I planned the football stadium right next to this, and also wanted to have the university campus on the other side, not of the highway, but of the northwest sort of rail connection which you're looking at right now. And I wanted to make sure that I at least kept enough space for the university to not make it seem too crammed, and also actually be able to add another station over there, since obviously I do want to have a station in close proximity to the campus as well as the football stadium, which is something I wanted to keep in mind, because the main reason that I am placing both the stadium but also the university and the rail yard over here, and possibly a bit more retail and industry at some point in the future, is because this is really the most accessible area of the city, since it is like located between these two highways, and also is going to have on both highways actual connections to them. It is by far the best place of the city to reach, and it is close enough to the center, I feel, to have these types of facilities in here, yet not far enough to really feel like far away from the city itself. Which is why I really wanted to have a stadium and a university, because you want to get these in areas which are quite accessible. Especially in the university's case, what you would quite often see in these newer cities is you don't really have a university in the center of your city, but it's a more newer campus along the outskirts of the town, which is why I figured this would be the best place to do so and reserve some space for it. Now, to actually talk about the football stadium over here, there's quite a number of things which I should say about it. One of them is that, yes, this is actually FC Barcelona's football stadium, which I am placing in a small town over here. It doesn't make quite a lot of sense, I know, and it's something which I do want to return to in the future, but this was sort of a placeholder stadium, which I did want to have over here anyway. Really, the main issue which I ran up to when I built this stadium was that I've spent quite a lot of time in the workshop looking for different football stadiums, but the main issue was that most of them were way too small given the maximum footprint that a building has in this game. I don't quite remember what it was, but I think the maximum footprint is something like 14 times 8 squares, which is very, very small for a football stadium. It's also why the actual football fields without the actual stadium around it are decently sized, but why it is so hard to actually find a stadium of a realistic size. And this was the only one which I could actually find which has a realistic size and a style which I could realistically see in a Dutch city. The only problem being that it's obviously FC Barcelona's stadium. Also, I'm just adding a ski resort over here, by the way. But yeah, it's obviously Barcelona's stadium, which is quite recognizable and memorable and quite weird to see in such a small town. But for this model itself, it is really large. I feel, especially compared to how large the city is. The football field inside of it is actually still quite underscaled realistically, and also the LOD model is quite low quality. Not that the actual model it has a very high quality, but the LOD is very noticeably low resolution. And one very game-breaking issue is actually that the render distance doesn't work well on the building, since the way that this building sort of cheats the system is by having a very small technical footprint, but like the building extends out of its footprint, which seems alright, since it allows you to build such a huge building without additional mods and still keep the original footprint rules. But the issue with that is that when you sort of skim like right next to the stadium over here, the game doesn't see the footprints anymore, but you would still want to see the stadium, but it just fades out of render distance, and so when you get to the sides of the stadium it just disappears and you see an empty grass field, because the game thinks the stadium is not there because it reads the football field and thinks it's outside of viewing distance, whereas the stadium extends far beyond its actual footprint, which is a bit of an issue that I don't quite like about it either. Regardless of that, I decided to at least for the time being make the best of it, add a small parking area around it, and make sure at least to decorate that a little bit, as well as the highway along here. Since this is essentially one of those highway parts, which you do see quite a lot, where you really want to show off your city almost, and show that stadium that you have, which is one of the few things which you also quite often see with football stadiums, is they are so visible from the highway that they're almost flaunting their looks and their club out there. But yeah, this area in general can be considered a small entertainment, sports little area, even though it just has the ski resort at the moment and a football stadium. I might extend it to some other things in the future, but I also want to have some retail around this area, and a small cinema and things like that. I feel those are really the type of facility that I want to have in this area. Despite the fact that paired with the university, it's going to create some massive traffic issues maybe in the future. It's really something which I felt is most logical, considering the placement of this within the city, but also alongside the highways over there. Now, another thing that I wanted to do in this video was to add these hedges to these houses, not just hedges, but also the overall foliage, since I felt like adding hedges and figured, well, now's my chance, I need to take it, because I don't quite often actually feel like placing hedges, because it can be, yeah, quite annoying at times. It's something that I should probably note. There was actually a comment in the comment section that I would like to return to from last video, which is about this very neighborhood, which is the fact that this is a very new neighborhood. And though I do like the way that it's set up and I'm quite happy with it, it really is very typical of the late 90s, early zeros, which seems very strange considering how close to the city center it is. But in the end, I really felt like this was the best way to fill this in. By the way, I will add a bit of more older housing along the sides of this. And it's really under the assumption that this city is not really a naturally grown city as you would usually see them, with an old center, and then you really sort of develop into newer and newer skins around that. So you get the 19th century ring around the old center, following the early 20th century typical red row brick houses. And that's something which I didn't quite want to do for this city, since it really follows the more newly developed special development zone areas. There's no real name for it in English, which makes it quite hard to explain, but I really felt like this was also where I wanted to, in this narrow space between the rail and the old city center, add a new neighborhood. And really most of the neighborhoods in this city are going to be very new. There's no real in-between very old and very new in this city. And really one of the reasons is because I like both very old and very new neighborhoods a bit more, but there's also major in-game limitation that I just don't feel like there are actual realistic 19th century Dutch houses. So it's really something which I don't feel I can get done realistically, so I'd rather just skip and try to not do at all, rather than go out of my way to make something try to work, but not actually make it work quite yet. Also, something I should say about these flashing screens, that'll be gone in a second, because I actually had to cut out quite a large segment of this time-lapse over here, because I was being an idiot and decided to remove all of these little brushes one by one, which for some reason the game asks you, do you want to do this, which is quite annoying if you want to remove many things at once, but at the end only realized that you can just instantly remove them with the rails, which I should have done way earlier from my own perspective. Anyway, that's just about it for this episode, with just a little bit of foliage. Foliage in general, by the way, is something that I will return to, but off camera, since I really want to zoom in on foliage and make sure it's good from every angle, and that doesn't quite work in time lapses, so that's something that I'll work on beside these videos, just to keep in mind that this is not quite going to be the final look of everything. Anyway, thank you guys for watching, and see you guys later, or not. And anyway, auf Wiedersehen.